everyone, welcome to Trade Day, brought to you by the Next Generation Ford Everest Day 6, and it has been an explosive day. The mega deal has landed. There are trades left, right and centre. So much to go through as we count down to Wednesday's deadline. To help us all through it, we have our Fox Footy experts, David King and Brad Johnson, and from the Herald Sun covering all the breaking news, John Ralph. Ralphie, what's gone down today?
We have waited many, many years for a mega deal. This is the big daddy of mega deals. This is the Tyrannosaurus Rex of mega deals. The mega deal which will deliver Jason Horne-Francis and Willie Rioli to Port Adelaide and the #1 overall pick to GWS. So Luke Jackson, in a separate deal, gets to Fremantle with the Dockers, already boasting about securing their unicorn. Isaac Rankin is finally a Crow. And Will Setterfield is the 192-centimetre midfielder that Adelaide wants and needs and desires. He has found his way to the hangar.
All right, let's break down this T-Rex deal, which has David King already roaring. How does it all come to fruition?
So, in essence, Port Adelaide tried to orchestrate this mega deal on Saturday, and yet they were trading away their first, second and third round picks. And so they weren't allowed to do it. The AFL looked into their statutes and they found that there was no discretion there. You know, you just can't trade away your entire haul of picks. And so they went back to the mega deal Mark II, as I call it. They traded in Collingwood's future second rounder and Fremantle's future third rounder. And so they now have those future picks to allow this deal to go through. It has been done. In its simplest form, North Melbourne go from losing Jason Horne-Francis to picks 1 and 2. And then they trade 1 to GWS, they get 2 and 3, and they get a Port Adelaide future first rounder, which, let's face it, could be 14, 15, 16. The Port Adelaide Footy Club gets Horne-Francis, Rioli, they trade out this year's 8, next year's future first rounder, plus 43, 53, 57, and they get next year's future second and third rounder. So it's a lot. West Coast trades out Rioli, their #2 pick this year, and 40, and they get 8 and 12 this year for local talent, which they'll trade in, and then Port Adelaide's future second and third rounder. And GWS, they trade out 3, 12, that Bobby Hill future second rounder. They're getting the #1 overall pick, who you expected they would take out of Aaron Cadman, the 194-centimetre generational forward. And of course, we told you that one was happening on Thursday. The mega deal has now been struck, and there are ramifications absolutely everywhere.
All right, you are forgiven at home if your head is spinning, because we've all been struggling to make sense. It is very complicated, very convoluted, but at face value, it looks like Port Adelaide come out of this really well. They get their man in Jason Horne-Francis, who 12 months ago was a #1 draft pick. They get Junior Rioli, and they're not giving up a great deal at #8 and some back-end picks.
So they move on next year's future first rounder. If Jason Horne-Francis is the star that everyone talked about 12 months ago, if they can get a modicum of the improvement that North Melbourne was not able to get, and then of course they bring in Junior Rioli, to think about these two players playing in a forward line. Now, Asava Ratugolea is a player at Geelong that they're not prepared to give up. Port Adelaide right now has pick 33. They've kept their pick 33 and they're still offering it to Geelong. And so it'll be interesting to think about the list demographic, whether they've gone older or younger. But if they could bring in Asava Ratugolea, now they would almost rival Geelong and Richmond as having won the trade period.
Yeah, so Port Adelaide done extremely well. I think that, the Giants, the Greater Western Sydney Giants as well, I think have pick 1, and they've still got 15, 18 and 19. So when you look at the Giants' overall aspect of this as well, they come out extremely strong with some players that they've lost along the way.
But to stay with Port for a sec, I mean, they've done an unbelievable job. They really have. I mean, the picks starting at pick 8, I mean, it's a speculative pick. It starts to get a bit wobbly, in my opinion, towards the back end of, or the middle to back end of the first round. You know what's there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think. History tells us that. So Jason Cripps and Port Adelaide, they've won the draft. They've won the trade period already, Ralphie, in my view, to land Horne-Francis and not pay a massive price. Junior Rioli, a specialist half forward. They're hard to find and they have a big impact on your football club. OK, they've lost a few future picks or gone backwards of some spots, but that's an outstanding effort. So it gives them a chance next year to win the flag. And I think this is why there's an urgency there. Boak 34, Dixon 32, Jonas and Lycett are 30 plus as well. So they're for the now. They've nearly said, OK, we've got to fast track the next wave coming through. So you bracket Horne-Francis with Butters, Rosie and Marshall and these guys as the next wave, but it's now for Port. This is Ken Hinkley's flag opportunity right here, right now in 2023.
So where do the Giants see themselves on the premiership clock, because they now have that coveted #1 pick?
So a club that lots of people would say is dumping salary cap room, they're actually wanting to compete. They feel like they've had 3 or 4 really underperforming years. So even though they're moving on that salary cap, I think if they can bring in Cadman, who again we've talked about a lot, you bring in Toby Bedford, who they acquired today. We'll talk about that one in a second with the Luke Jackson trade. Ivan Soldo, who's a tap ruckman. They are filling in very specific positional needs. Now, Mark McGowan, my colleague at the Herald Sun, has reported today that Jagger O'Meara is someone that they're having a massive crack at. Now, I would imagine that Hawthorn would pay a significant part of his wage. They're very keen to get another top 20 pick in. GWS has picks 18 and 19. I just would say on face value, with the likes of Tom Green and Stephen Canilio and Josh Kelly as those inside midfielders, it doesn't make all the sense in the world. I'm still trying to work my way through it, a story that's only breaking 20 minutes ago on the Herald Sun website. Good
player, O'Meara, no question. I don't think he's in that first round category. Maybe slides to a second, back end of a second. So if Hawthorn were able to, get this sort of deal underway and get a bit of a good feel about it, they'd be rapt to get a first rounder for him. I'm not sure that would occur.
He's not a first rounder, Ralph.
No, we know that.
Well, we don't know that because we think GWS is going to pay that.
Yeah.
So it's only what they're prepared to pay.
No, it's our opinion that I don't think
he comes 7th and the best and fairest. He played 21 games and the team won 8 games this year. So how do you equate that back to first round? You can't. But it's about what the Giants are prepared to pay. It's the same with the old auction theory, isn't it? It's not what their house is worth. It's what someone will pay. So the thing that concerns me with all this is they were prepared to pay picks 3, 12 and a second rounder next year, to get pick 1. So if Cadman is the prize that they've chased, it's a significant investment. And I know we'll get to the Kangaroos in a moment, but GWS are no fools. They're not asleep at the wheel here. This is a clear, directional decision.
It's targeted.
To get that guy that they know you can't win a premiership without. We've seen what Cameron's done for Geelong this year. And all the reports, you compared him to, what did you say last week?
Well, I compared him, I said that he was Harry Mackay and he was Jeremy Cameron. I spoke to another recruiter today. He said he's not Mackay, he's Charlie Curnow. He jumps to the ball better than I just love everything. I love everything about what this club has done. They've gone out and said, this is the bloke that we want. We're going to go and get him. He's going to make an impact according to his Vic Country coach next year. I just think it's sensational. Look at all the midfielders, the dime a dozen midfielders, like Setterfield, like Haitley, like Caldwell, that they've got in and they've lost. This bloke's a Vic Country solid citizen, Vic Country co-captain.
He's a jet.
He's going to stay there for 10 years. I think it's brilliant.
So why did the North Melbourne Football Club give up the coveted #1 pick?
Yeah, you know my thoughts on this. I'm extremely frustrated by this. I just don't know at what stage North Melbourne will decide to invest in a tall forward of note. And there's one sitting there, you hold the pick that will secure this guy for a decade. They overlooked Logan McDonald a few years ago and everyone said, OK, you've gone for Phillips, we'll wait and see. OK, and I understand that. It's a wait and see. But when you see what GWS have done to come up the board to get this guy, I think a country Victorian kid, like he's an hour down the road. Like, this is perfect for them. Now, clearly they don't rate him as high as what everyone else does, and that's OK. And time will tell. But it's a big gamble for a football club where not much has gone right for 3 or 4 years.
So can I argue the case for North Melbourne? I don't necessarily agree with it, but they would say we need 7 or 8 good players. We don't just need 1 or 2. They would say that there is a real risk profile where the players have been picked in the top 10 as key position players. So the last 15 of them over the last 4 or 5 years.
Do you know what there's a risk profile with, Ralphie?
Yeah.
Anyone that's gone to the Kangaroos in the last 3 years has been a risk profile. Staff and players. The joint's in crisis. It has been for some time. So I agree with all that. And that may be all 100% correct. But have a look at, if you don't draft your own power forward, this is the cost that in effect you have to pay down the track. This is the cost of what Jeremy Cameron was for Geelong. It was 3 first rounders and 2 second rounders going back the other way. It's a 2 to 3 year investment at some point down the track. Now, the Kangaroos are a long way from that discussion. I understand that. But when do you start straightening up your spine? The midfield's an easy discussion, and they'll get 2 good midfielders. Yeah. But so will everyone else.
Yeah, I think
we don't know the eye of what they'll be an early pick next year, North Melbourne as well.
No, they won't. They'll be a Port Adelaide pick. So he's going to be the.
So what will they get next year? If they finish last next year, North Melbourne, what pick up?
Oh, they'll get their own pick. But the problem.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So therefore, they could have the target, Kingy. This Cadman has come a little bit from nowhere, and I understand the hype around this guy, but I think the two mids, looking at it now, the two mids, they could have their eye on the best tall forward next year because North Melbourne are not climbing.
Yeah.
So they could get two gun mids this year, and the pressure's on the two players they pick up, no question. And the pick one next year in 2023 could be the tall forward you're after in that build.
Mate, Horn Francis was pick one last year, gone.
I get it.
Pick one this year, gone. For pick 2 and 3.
Yeah, no.
So you're giving up 2 pick 1s for 2 and 3. I don't understand it at all.
Actually, I totally agree with that, and we've had that discussion. But now that the decision has been made, I'm going to myself, okay, they've got to have an eye to this because they're looking at players 2, 3, 4 years ahead. So they may actually have in the back of their mind here, okay, this is the guy we want
but
next year.
Things have changed, mate. Horn Francis was part of the discussion 6 weeks ago. Now the whole list has turned on its head.
Cadman's changed. Cadman's come from probably outside top 10 to all of a sudden being...
He's Charlie Curnow and Jeremy Cameron.
That's my point.
So let's bottom line.
That's my point. A kid could have a breakout year next year in the second half of the year, like they all do when they're drafted in the top 10, and they get built up, but then you have a bolter.
Do you like what the Kangaroos have done?
I'm coming to terms with it. On the
yes or no, the tall versus the two mids?
I'm going yes now because I think next year they get their tall because they won't climb the ladder.
So here's the problem. I don't think he's number one on their board. So they say to themselves, we get an extra pick next year from Port Adelaide. But the horror scenario is next year they sit there, Jason Horne-Francis. He absolutely dominates. They look at that future first rounder they have from Port Adelaide. Jason Horne-Francis helps them dominate. They look at it going from 7 to 12 to 14 to 17. And they look at the pick they could have had, 3 first rounders from Adelaide. They're all the issues they're going to have. And of course, we may well see Aaron Cadman flying as well. So across the board...
They couldn't have done the Adelaide one. I
understand that, but I'm just saying...
Adelaide one a lot, but that's just nonsense. They're not going to give up. You can't cry about spilt milk. That was last year.
My point is that they will look at the next 12 months and it'll be a really tough ride for the next 12 months for this club. Now, if they'd been able to get, let's call it 2, 3 and 9, you see those 3 kids coming together, and we've seen it with so many of those premiership mixes, you get multiple early picks. But that Port Adelaide pick, it could be 16 or 17.
So what makes it look perhaps bad is that it is all lumped in together. So it wasn't just giving up pick number 1, it was how do we compensate them for losing the number 1 draft pick from 12 months ago. They were probably never going to be equitable in this situation, were they? It was really going to be hard for Port Adelaide to satisfy if it was just a straight swap.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's the issue. There have been times where you can use the number 1 pick and you might get, say, 3 and 9. But they've given up Jason Horne-Francis, the multiplying effect of that, and then they've only given up a future first rounder. Now, they'll say, look, we got picks back, we got 30 and 50 back, but...
they've been dudded, Ralphie. They've been dudded, mate. We'll get to the Jackson arrangement in a moment.
If you've got 2 and 3, you take the tall and the small. The tall gets a little bit of cover for the Wardlaw or the Sheasel that comes through. If it's me, you're taking a tall and the small, and you might be picking a generational forward.
It just puts a full stop on an awful period. It really does.
All right, we're going to let Kingy take a deep breath, and we're going to have a look at the West Coast Eagles, because on paper, I think Eagles fans might be asking the question as to what they've done. Out Junior Rioli and pick number 2, getting back 8 and 12.
So they get 8 and 12, and then they get a future first rounder again next year. So they get another multiplying effect. The issue for West Coast is they thought there were a lot of senior players, a lot of draftable players who didn't want to come to West Coast. And so they're very keen to secure local talent. Now, it wasn't Luke Jackson, but there's a couple of players at 8 and 12 that fit in really well, and then they get a future first rounder again next year. Now, they're probably getting unders for Willie Rioli. They offered him a 3-year deal at $575,000. He's going on a 4-year deal at $600,000. So they'd say, look, it's not ideal, but I think they would feel like the only way for us to rise up the ladder is to get local players. Otherwise, the Chris Judd effect, we get a couple of good years out of them and they leave.
I think they're just backing in the fact this year they had a lot of players underdone to start the year and they chased their tail all year. I think no operations, and West Coast, I think, with their senior players, are going to back them into to give them a rise, draft the youngsters in and just build that list from underneath as the top end start to drop out. All
right, before the mega deal took over and took everyone's concentration, we did have a big domino fall, Ralphie, with Luke Jackson heading west to the Fremantle Dockers, a 3-way club swap.
Yeah, that's correct. So Melbourne gets pick 13, a future first rounder, and they get Fremantle's future second rounder. That was the deal breaker. That was Fremantle throwing in their future second rounder. They get pick 44 for Toby Bedford at Melbourne, and then they trade it back to the Dockers, who also got a pick in the 60s, and so Toby Bedford now becomes a GWS player. The really interesting thing for me is that the Dockers now have given up that extra second rounder. They've got North Melbourne's, but they want Jeremy Sharp, and the price for Jeremy Sharp is a second rounder. So how do you get an extra second rounder in? Now, that could be Rory Lobb. You go to the Bulldogs and you say, are you prepared to give up your future second rounder? We get it off the Bulldogs and we give it off for Jeremy Sharp. So for Melbourne, they have pick 27 now, of course, and that's what they can do to get Brodie Grundy across the line. It's probably unders. The Cats have offered up only pick 25 for Ollie Henry, and that's pretty much their final offer. And so for Collingwood, you're thinking, do we get 27 for Grundy, an All-Australian? Do we give Ollie Henry, we get 25, that's unders as well. But I think it's just, you bring players in at Collingwood, and it's the sum total of players, and you're probably going to get unders for both of those players.
Done a great job for Fremantle, haven't they? I mean, they got their man. And you can argue the fact whether they paid overs or not. This is a guy that's going to play a hell of a lot of football for them going forward. He's durable. He plays every week. I think he's missed 3 games or something in 3 years. He hardly misses. I like what they've done. This is a smart footy club.
Yep.
I think that they'll get sharp and they just get what they want at the moment, and the price they pay, it'll balance out. So I'm really comfortable with what they've done, and Melbourne as well. Good football clubs allow the players to shift at the right price. So Melbourne will now launch. You get Grundy and Gawn together, and everyone's talking Gawn down like he hasn't played for 6 years. Like he's a gun ruckman in our competition. He played half a dozen games at the start of the year, and Collingwood were flying at clearances. So I'm really excited about what he brings to Melbourne and the assets that are still strong. They're a clearance-based team. Oliver, Petrarca and Viney and these guys getting first service. It's what they do well, so they strengthen.
They'll be in the... Fremantle with this. Fremantle's back six to me is as strong as any back six in the competition, building a premiership around that now. So if they stay healthy with the inclusion of Jackson, with what they're able to produce this year, Fremantle are a threat. So all of a sudden, we're going to be in that same situation again next year. We'll have 5 or 6 teams again that we'll be all talking about throughout the year that can actually, win the flag.
The only thing I would say is that West Coast trade out Rioli, pick 2 and 40. They get in 8, 12 and a second and third rounder next year. Why didn't they just say, pick 2, Luke Jackson, you're our bloke. You play as a hybrid midfielder for 12 months and then all of a sudden, Nick Naitanui succession plan. Now, maybe they couldn't afford him at $900,000 a year, but I just keep thinking to myself, he probably would have played for West Coast if West Coast really pushed hard. I just think in the long run, Jackson's going to be a superstar, and they could have had him if they'd given up pick 2.
Former pick 3 and proven now a premiership player.
Yeah, and they'll say we needed to multiply our picks and we need future picks, but, if you're looking for the local kid, why not just get the bloke who's already playing the flag rather than the kids who, might be 3 or 4 years of development away?
Spot on with Grundy. Absolutely. Like that deal that will get done with Melbourne, this is massive for them as a club. 10-0 this year, then they faded, but look out next year. They could start exactly the same way again with this guy fit and healthy.
So Grundy, like I said, he missed 5 games in the 6 years prior to this year. So this year was a bit of a write-off. A stress fracture in the ankle. Like, it's not like he turned up unfit and did 3 hamstrings in 8 weeks. Like, this is a solid citizen. I think it'll be great for all parties and all concerned.
Ralphie, the Isaac Rankin deal has been done to make him a Crow. We're waiting on this for a while, but it has gone through.
There was a bit of brinkmanship, let's face it. Both clubs knew that pick 5 was the centrepiece and anything else was just spare change. So Adelaide trade pick 5, their future 3rd and 4th rounders for this year's pick 46 from Gold Coast and a 4th rounder. So why did Gold Coast only accept 5? Let's face it, it's probably unders because they knew that the Crows could just put Isaac Rankin into the open draft. None of the other clubs are going to pick him, and so they always knew it was pretty much 5. They've got, I think, 5 future first, 2nd and 3rd and 4th rounders now, and Adelaide gets Isaac Rankin.
Yeah, this is massive for the Adelaide Crows. They've got an absolute star, I think, and I don't throw it around lightly. This guy can light up a game, and with what Adelaide are doing with their current build and some of the youngsters that he's going to be around next year, Rochelle we talk about all the time, Thilthorpe at the feet of Thilthorpe and Schoenberg through the middle, Scholl improving on the wing with Cook on the other wing, Saliga. I think Adelaide's build is becoming quite strong in terms of the personnel, the young personnel that they're... And Gallant up forward as well is the other one who showed a little bit this year. So you add Isaac Rankin to that with a bit of midfield spark, Adelaide are on the rise.
How long until they're playing finals, Kingy?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's a tough one to answer, Sarah. You need to have a look at the whole trade period first and see what they land in the draft. To me, it's still a fair way away, done properly. I mean, they could go after some senior core talent next year and spike quite quick, but to what? To play finals rather than win a flag? That's the age-old discussion. But to talk about this player specifically, put the contract aside. To get him for pick 5 is a steal. It really is. And I want to compare two players, and you tell me who they are, just see which one stacks up better. So per 100 minutes played after 17 games of footy, player 1 versus player 2. Player 2 on the right there, rating, so more impact on games after 17 games. They both had the same amount of... we look at those impact rating points. So 10 plus is a solid game. They both had 5 in their first 17 games. One's good for a goal a week. One doesn't really hit the scoreboard. And look at the score involvement, it's pretty much spot on. So player 1 is Jason Horne-Francis and player 2 is Isaac Rankin. So they are getting a player that even in his initial first season did what he did. We saw what he did last year. I think for a large part of the season, he was the number 1 forward 50 crummer in the competition, in the AFL. He had ridiculous numbers. So I don't know whether he's just a forward 50 player or he can become a midfielder. But if he can become a midfielder, the dynamic changes for the Adelaide Crows list. They're still going to need to build that midfield, but if this guy's not a part of it, but if he is, he fast-tracks them enormously to get back to your point.
I think 12 months ago you would have said Isaac Rankin's a one-trick pony. You know, he jumps on blokes' heads, he does extraordinary things, but where are the goal assists and where's the tank to actually get up to half forward and play midfield? I mean, you guys would be better judges than I, but I think he's shown the development, and if he can put another 20% on, he could play some centre square minutes or bet, 5 or 6 a quarter.
He has to.
Yeah, that's right. And his team-based game went to a different level this year, I thought. At first year, it was the flair, and we're all up and excited about that, and that was great to watch. But the individual aspects of his game turned into a team-based game, which Adelaide will now build. Matty Nix is strong on that, and he'll take that to another level.
The Bombers haven't been super active in the trade period so far, but they have...
A bit of frustration, Sarah. Are you all right?
No, we're good. They have netted a player today via the arch rival Carlton.
You're good. You're not great, though, I tell you what. So they've got Will Setterfield, who's the 192-centimetre midfielder who, look, they considered as the pick 1, of course, when they were tossing up between Tim Taranto and Andy McGrath. So Carlton gave up pick 68 in Setterfield, and they got back a future 4th rounder, which I think shows that Carlton wasn't that interested in keeping him. Now, my understanding is that he has got a 2-year deal. The Dons also met with Sam Wiedemann today. They will likely get him for a future 3rd rounder. I spoke to Josh Marnie, their football boss, only a few minutes ago, and he said we'll work through that in the next couple of days. They're looking at key position options, but I think probably more is to listed free agents and rookies. They still feel like they can play the likes of James Stewart, and clearly Jaden Laverde has a crack, but he's undersized there. I still think they're screaming out for that target there, but they've got pick 4, pick 22. They'll get the Davey brothers as father-sons. They'll bring in some really exciting players, but they're still a long way away.
I think of Will Brodie he's probably the go-to of a guy that was, not playing great football, comes out and dominates the midfield for Fremantle. Setterfield, coming through the ranks through the AFL Academy, was a very good player. Very, very good, solid all around the ground. So so was Will Brodie. Can he get to that sort of level now? That's the big question mark that we're all waiting to see on Will Setterfield. It's back on him, big summer. Can he go into that midfield and get his 20 to 25?
The Bombers haven't had to give up a great deal for it. It's another experienced body, another big body.
Where does he play for me? I don't see him as a starting centre bounce mid. I mean, we haven't seen him do it as that. We've seen him move to a wing. We've seen him play bits and pieces on ball. That's my worry.
Yeah.
You recruit another player without a position.
Yeah, are you taking midfield minutes or centre square minutes off Hobbs? Are you taking them off Stringer? Are you taking them off McGrath? You're taking off all those players. But look, I was pretty critical of them doing very little last week. They're having a crack with players they'll get for a future 4th and a future 3rd rounder. And I think for Sam Wiedemann, like Harry Jones is going to be a very nice developing 3rd forward. Peter Wright, has done exceptionally well. So at least you're bringing in a top 10 player. You're bringing in 2 players who have been selected in the top 10 of the draft, albeit 5 or 6 years ago. I think Sam Wiedemann has been an extraordinarily frustrating player, maybe the most frustrating in the comp, to be honest. He's got such weapons, but he doesn't throw himself at the contest enough. And so we get to see whether Brad Scott, the super coach, can bring that out of him.
So to ask your question back to you, when do they win a final, Sarah?
Win a final. Soon, hopefully. Just look out. The draft is going to be where the Bombers unleash, and that is happening on November 28th and 29th. You can catch all the action right here on Fox Footy as the hottest young talent in the land find homes at AFL clubs. It is an exciting night. Dreams come true, and we will cover every moment right here on Fox Footy.